We made it to Friday. Congratulations, everyone. Well done. And, of course, we've got tons to get to today, and we're starting talking about the thousands of Venezuelans in Illinois that are now given deferred deportation, while the Department of Homeland Security designates Venezuela as too dangerous for recent migrants to return to. So that's the latest here, and that also doesn't just delay deportation proceedings, but it also allows for them to get work permits. Welcome in Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. And a lot to be said about this, of course, with last month you had leaders from across the spectrum, from Democrats at the State House to the U.S. Congress to even business group leaders from the Restaurant Association and Manufacturers Association, all coming together to urge the Biden administration to allow for work permits, saying that recently arrived migrants to Illinois, let alone the millions in the country, they wanted to give them some temporary worker status, and that was achieved, at least for those Venezuelans in the United States, as asylum seekers. So let's get into the details here. There are thousands in Illinois that are Venezuelan. Of course, we've had about 14,000 newly arrived migrants since last year, and all in Chicago, maybe some other areas, but of that, 5,000 are Venezuelan, according to data compiled by Chicago aldermen. But it's unclear how many of those are able-bodied workers. So that's for the work permit parts, how many able-bodied workers there are. But what about for all of them? Of course, if they're here before July 31st, they will have delayed deportation protection and also get those work permits. So the DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas determined that an 18-month temporary protected status extension and redesignation of Venezuela are based on that country's, quote, increased instability and lack of safety due to the enduring humanitarian, security, political, and environmental conditions, according to the agency. Governor Pritzker, of course, as we reviewed yesterday, put out a statement saying that reducing wait times for employment approvals and expanding protection status for those coming from Venezuela will get people working and on a path to building a better future for themselves and for their families. In Illinois, he said that we're facing a worker shortage in critical industries like hospitality, food processing, healthcare, and transportation, and these additional workers will help relieve those shortages and the burden they place on employers. And you got the employer groups like the Illinois Manufacturers Association laying out some interesting stats. This is from last month, August 30th, when you had a lot of these various groups come together, business groups and policymakers sounding off on the need for temporary worker permit status. Here's Mark Denzler from the Illinois Manufacturers Association.
I'm just going to leave you with a couple points from a Goldman Sachs study that came out 2 days ago. Immigrants are likely to account for 500,000 new jobs in the next 3 quarters in the United States. And between pre-pandemic, January of 2020 and July of 2023, the immigrant labor force in the United States grew 9.5%. The native-born workforce grew 1.5%, 4 times higher growth among immigrants. In the immigrant labor force today, the labor participation rate is 67%. That's 5 percentage points higher than it is for native-born workers. So the Goldman Sachs economist summary is clear. The foreign-born labor force has made a disproportionate positive impact to reducing the jobs gap. We need the president now to enact the significant public benefit provisions to expand authorization. And as the senator said, we need Congress and the president to act on long-term reform. It's critically important that all these immigrants have the ability to work, support their family, and support America.
You've got Mark Denzler making that statistical argument. Senator Dick Durbin also spoke at that event and sounded off on what's next in Congress.
But, every journey starts with the first step. And this is certainly a significant one to bring together business leaders and leaders throughout the community in the state of Illinois. We understand these people are ready to work. And when they work, they become less of a burden on other people and they become more independent on their own. We need workers desperately all across this city and across this state. Now's the time to do it.
So again, hearing just some of the policymakers, Governor Pritzker also at that event talking about this issue.
Well, we're going to stand up and take care of the people who arrive here. This is a humanitarian crisis. Now, we're also at the same time asking the federal government, particularly the Biden administration, to provide more dollars. There are dollars available. They have not meted those out yet, and so we're continuing to ask, because even the dollars that we've put out, which should be reimbursed, haven't yet been fully reimbursed.
So there you go, some of the arguments about the funding, about the work permits. But one thing that's crucial here is that the Venezuelans getting this temporary protection from deportation, 18 months worth, which somebody on YouTube points out an interesting question. Will that include background checks? They say no background checks for 18 months, a free pass. So that's an interesting perspective there. But Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary, made sure that this is known, that this is for people here before July 31st. So it's not to say, hey, this is a beacon for Venezuelans to cross the border. He says it's critical that Venezuelans understand that those who have arrived here after July 31st, 2023, are not eligible for such protection and instead will be removed, he says, when they're found to not have a legal basis to stay. But you've got concerns about this whole situation. Last month, State Representative Charlie Meyer, downstate Republican who operates a farm, he says farmers are more than happy to welcome migrant workers, but he wants them to be vetted. And this type of program, there are concerns that they're not going to be properly vetted. So a lot more to say about all of this. And coming up, we'll hear about the issue of how Chicago is going to care for and house these migrants, Venezuelans or Mexicans or wherever else they're coming from, how they plan to house them heading into the winter months with a nearly $30 million contract for military-grade base camp-style tents. We'll hear from Chicago State Representative LaShawn Ford about this and more. So stay tuned. It is here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on WMAY. Talking about the migrant situation in the United States and in particular in Illinois, with 14,000 migrants from the past year coming over the U.S. southern border, some seeking asylum and being transported up to Chicago. 14,000. There's been millions that have crossed the border into Texas and other border states, but you've got them unable to handle it, so they're sending them to, quote, sanctuary cities. And we see the growing costs, everything from Illinois taxpayers subsidizing the health care for those over the age of 65 to the costs for housing these migrants. And you've got military-grade base camps that are going to be set up for $30 million that the city entered into a contract with Garda Worldwide. Is that the company's name here? You've got this issue, of course, raising some different concerns, not just about the costs or not just about Garda World being the contractor here, and people saying, hey, they worked with Florida for their types of camps that are helping with various ways to shelter migrants. But in Chicago, you've got a winter coming. It's going to be cold. Even looking at some of the recent analysis of how cold winters can get, you've got the issue of very cold conditions possible here, with the 28-degree temperature from December through February, according to the National Weather Service. So the tents that are going to be set up, some people even characterizing them as, you should not call them, military-grade tents. You should call them refugee camps. Others characterizing it as concentration camps. All of these are charged words, no question, but tax dollars are going to fund this to the tune of nearly $30 million. Now, State Representative LaShawn Ford, he said that these tents are not going to fix the housing issues. He says, especially during those cold months, this is a short-term, not even a solution, but a short-term answer to a growing problem, he said. And then I think it's inadequate. He says, I'm concerned about it not being sufficient for Chicago's conditions. Again, it's going to be cold. We're talking 28-degree temperatures from December through February. Ford goes on to say what could happen is ultimately the city could say, now we have to put them in hotels because it's too cold out. But Ford's not the only one that's raised those concerns. Humanitarian concerns have been raised for quite some time. including from Chicago Alderman Andre Vasquez, who says that it's not a good look for the city. We're in a crisis, he tells the Chicago Sun-Times, having to make quick decisions, noting that Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, quote, inherited this mess, but said that I still don't believe this is the path we need to go forward as a city. So a lot of concerns about the overall humanitarian issues when it comes to addressing shelter for migrants in Chicago. And it's one thing to say somebody's inherited something, but Johnson has stated time and again that he will uphold Chicago's sanctuary city status. So, inheriting a situation or prolonging the situation. I think that that's something that could be open for debate. But let's hear what some Republicans from the State House have to say. Marty McLaughlin, Joe Sosnowski, Republicans at the Illinois House Caucus. And here's what they had to say earlier this week when asked about oversight of this funding of all of these different programs, from healthcare to shelter to even more.
I think at least the public now really understands what the cost of sanctuary city and sanctuary state status is. And that cost is less funding for other programs like the mentally disabled or developmentally disabled work programs. So there is a real cost to this, and we'll keep peeling back the onion to make sure we understand what the total cost is as it relates to this program, because as a taxpayer, that number of 1.2 billion is a number that it boggles the mind of many of the people that are struggling to pay their business taxes, to pay their property taxes. And I've got a nephew with a disability who's got Down syndrome, and I know that Misericordia Home and many of these private public partnerships certainly could use assistance as it relates to care for citizens.
So again, that's Marty McLaughlin talking about the healthcare issues here that there are, and questions about oversight. Even Joe Sosnowski, Republican from Rockford, sounding off, saying that this lack of oversight needs to change.
Where we spend money and how we get money, two extremely important functions of state government and the legislature. When we talk about $500 million or $1 billion, we spend this in terrible ways all the time. This came up just recently when the governor himself realized, we're spending so much money on non-resident health care.
So again, some Republicans just having their voice heard on the oversight of the spending here, and this is all in the terms of the conversation of healthcare providers getting contracts with the city that are paying traveling nurses like $190 an hour to the $30 million that's going to go to base camps, and the $500 million plus that's going to go to the healthcare for these migrants. But there's a dire situation up in Chicago. These base camps could provide some temporary relief, but concerns about the optics of it and the humanitarian issues, all part of this. But you also have the questions of where they're at now, and it's spread all over the city. We saw several weeks ago the Chicago Fraternal Order of Police president, John Catanzara, take a live stream into several police stations where migrants were sleeping on the floor there. But if you look at the website welcometochicago.org, it's a website put together by the Chicago Alderman Andre Vasquez. He's on a committee in Chicago to look at all of this data. And they've compiled a fascinating website with all kinds of information concerning the demographics, where they're from. This is where I found that there's about 5,000 Venezuelans of the 14,000 that are in Chicago. So we have a number of just how many there are. But if you look here, sheltering and staging areas, and it breaks down all of the different, totals of migrants that are in Chicago and where they're staying at. Just a rundown of some of this list. They're staying at a YWLA. They're staying at Wright College, Social Club, Super 8, O'Hare Airport. You've got Gage Park, High Ridge YMCA, the Inn of Chicago, and just scores of other places, Daly College, the police departments and precincts. So again, a lot of information here. If you get some time, you might want to be able to just score through this because it breaks down a whole bunch of stuff, demographics and whatnot, but including those who are staying at various places throughout the city of Chicago. So a lot more to be said about all of this. But one thing also I wanted to update here is a message from the immigration's office out of the U.S. government. And it's concerning what we saw last week of a federal judge saying that DACA is illegal. The deferred action for childhood arrivals is illegal. So it says here from the immigration's office on September 13th, U.S. courts in the Southern District of Texas issued a decision finding that DACA was unlawful and expanding the original July 16th, 2021 injunction and order of vacatur, which vacates that rule to cover the final rule. However, the court maintained a partial stay on the order for all DACA recipients who received their initial DACA status prior to July 16 of 2021. Accordingly, current grants of DACA and related employment authorization documents remain valid until they expire unless individually terminated. However, USCIS will continue to accept and process DACA renewal requests and accompanying applications for employment authorization under the DACA regulation, as it has since October 31st, 2022, in accordance with the decision. So hopefully that answers some questions about the status of DACA. And I know that DACA is one of those categories where Governor J.B. Pritzker has said, they can become police officers in Illinois. Interesting to see if the Venezuelans who are getting that temporary protected status will be able to become police officers in the state of Illinois. So again, big update, touching on all kinds of things when it comes to the migrant issue, especially how it impacts the state of Illinois. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on WMA.